Good morning, everyone. I see everyone is joining us in the chat right now. It's a pleasure to have you back in our monthly panel. Today, we're going to be tackling the topic of feedback. While you join in, let us know where you're joining us from. It's always a pleasure to see you. I'm in beautiful Montreal this morning, and it is officially back to school season. So we're not gonna do some school learning today, but we're really excited to learn with our three experts in the panel. Let's spice things up a little bit. Instead of letting us know where you're joining us from, let me know what is your summer highlight. Like it's the first day of school. I miss sharing those with all my school peers. My summer highlight was going to New York City, start of the summer. Went to see a baseball game between the Yankees and Dodgers, two of the best teams. I'm a big baseball fan, so it was a great time. But I'm also super excited to have you today. Maybe today's going to be my summer highlight. Before we get started, and I pass the ball to our speaker, we're just going to do a bit of housekeeping. I'm letting you know this presentation is currently being recorded, so you will receive the recording at the end of the presentation. There will be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the presentation also. That being said, don't wait until the last 15 minutes to send in your question. I know me and the panelists love to see you interact in the chat during those panels. It's what makes those moments so special for us. I feel like you all are kind of the fifth member of this panel when you start interacting, and we love to see it. So don't hesitate. Have all your questions, comments ready, and who knows, maybe we're going to answer them during the panel. So without further ado, let's get into it with a presentation of our three speakers. Sarah, do you want to start?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm a senior HR business partner with Berkeley, also in Montreal today, not too far from Laurent. My role is to provide guidance, champion initiatives that drive engagement, performance, enable growth for the business. And my summer highlight was actually staying at a cottage that was on a floating dock for my birthday getaway, which was so special and really a great memory. I think I'll cherish for my entire life because how many times can you say that you slept on a floating dock? Of course, there was like a roof and all. So yeah, super excited for the conversation today and to speak with two phenomenal co-panelists. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Nice. Thank you, Sarah. And we're happy to have you back in the Working panel. So for those who remember, Sarah was part of our engagement crisis panel, which we had in when was it? June, right?
June.
End of June,
Mhm.
yeah. So thank you for coming back. We're happy to have you. Um, we also have a new speaker, Dr. Hayes. Do you want to present yourself to the audience?
Hello, everybody. I am really overjoyed to have an opportunity to be able to serve on this panel with all of these lovely, lovely people. It's been pretty wonderful being able to workshop everything before we got here. But I am Dr. Hayes, Eden-Reneé, and Dr. E are also fine. I'm the CEO and owner of Pluralism Solutions, as you can see on the screen there. You can find my website to learn more about me. But I have a PhD in DEI. So I help companies try to figure out what is it that can be done in order to infuse DEI strategies within the structure and policies of the organization. It is a lot of unconscious bias trainings as well, especially as it relates to the search process to try to make that more equitable. But lots and lots of things that I do to try to help companies, and I'm really happy and fun and to be able to do that with those companies. And on my summer highlight, I see a lot of people adding things in that are all about being outside in nature. Mine feels like the opposite. I took my kids to a theme park last week. And I got to basically live vicariously through my son, who was chosen by Ollivander to like for his wand. So I was just ecstatic, like very, very proud parent. Like I was beaming so much while I was filming the whole thing. It was entirely too much fun. So his wand actually comes from the hands of Ollivander. And for those of you who are not Harry Potter geeks, that is the wand maker within Harry Potter.
That's awesome. So when we mention back to school at the start of the panel, I think Hogwarts also counts. So I hope your son has a first great day of school back in Hogwarts. We wish him the best. Last but not least, Dr. Brower, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, super excited to be here, you all. Looking forward to our dialogue. I'm Tracy Brower, the Vice President of Workplace Insights for Steelcase. My PhD is in the sociology of work, how we affect our work, how it affects us. I am a senior contributor with Forbes and Fast Company, and I've written 3 books. The most recent is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work. And oh, so many great things about the summer. I love driving around in my 1979 convertible VW Bug, but my husband and I are also going to a lot of concerts. So this will betray my generation. We got to see Rick Springfield, Jewel, Journey, and my favorite of all time, Sarah McLachlan. So it's been a great summer.
Wow, that's a nice. I love also big fan of festival season, so happy you get to enjoy it. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Brower. Those are some really exciting summer highlights, and I'm looking in the chat a little bit too. I think there's some really good ones out there too. A lot of outdoors, so that's really good. Always a good thing. Hope you all had some good weather while you were there. New dog. So hi to Charlene. I hope she's doing well. And also Olympics. Same. I was obsessed for the Olympics for 2 weeks during that period. So I really relate. So without further ado, are we ready to get started with this panel? Perfect. Before we start, I have a quick question for you. So just so we understand what's the situation with all of your organization here, we'd like to know at what frequency do you like to try to gather feedback from your employees? So post your answers in the chat when you're ready. So is it every week? Is it every quarter? Is it every year? Or do you not really gather feedback from your employees? We'd like to know because after all, that's the topic of the panel we're going to have today. So post your answers. And then as answers are coming in, let's get started. So first question, before we really get into the action or the meat and potato, as our collaborator Mathieu likes to call it, let's just dig down a little bit on the importance of feedback. So my first question would be, what is the importance of feedback for modern organizations? Dr. Hayes, do you want to get started with this one?
Sure. I seeing all the responses that people are already doing it, really at least annually we see in there, but a lot of are doing it at least once a quarter, which is pretty cool. Which tells me that you know the importance of feedback, plus you're already gathering it right now within your organization, and you see that that's a good way to try to get especially anonymous ideas as to what's going on and how people feel about what's happening within the organization. We really need that because what are we without our talent, without our employees? We can't function, we can't run. And as our organizations get larger and larger, it probably creates more silos, probably creates like less communication between everyone. So with that feedback, we have a chance to see like what's truly happening, and we can consider, well, what's the best iteration for what we should do next with whatever our initiative is. What I always like to add in there is trying to think about, okay, but how is it this anonymous feedback can also be helpful to uncover other things? So one of the things that we do also know is that some of our decision making, some of our ideas are really rooted in some type of a bias. It's not going to be every single time, but if people are perceiving bias within the organization, especially against their own group or against, people that they love and know and trust, then they're probably going to have some negative things towards the company. they could be less engaged, that quiet quitting. There could be retention issues, their productivity is affected. And the thing with unconscious bias is that we don't know that a decision might have been driven by it. And it's through feedback that we can find out that, that there's a possibility that we need to look further into to try to figure out how to mitigate it, to make sure that our environments are equitable for everybody, regardless of what their demographics are. So feedback is really necessary in order for us to be able to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's so important. And I think it's even more important today with the talent shortage because we need to know how people are experiencing their work, how they're experiencing the culture in the organization, so we can continuously improve the organization and therefore attract and retain and engage and develop. The other thing I think is so critical is there's so much more distance today. We're working remote, we're working hybrid, all of that. And even if we're in the office all the time, everybody else may not also be in the office all the time. So it's really important that we have systems where we can listen, right? Because it's not as inherent if we're not all together all the time to be able to read body language and ask people how they're doing and check in informally. So that system for gathering feedback becomes really important. The other thing is, I think a lot of times we think about this collecting feedback challenge as big data or anonymous data or more data, and that's really helpful. We can get a sense for patterns. And I think it's really important that it's about dialogue and individual feedback, right? Like we're checking in with people and saying, how is it going? We're talking to them in a performance discussion and saying, gosh, what is the learning or growth that's important to you? And so that's another reason that feedback is so especially important. And that is so that we can create opportunities for growth and learning and for people to connect with the organization, because each of those are super correlated with happiness. So many really, really important reasons for us to collect feedback today on lots and lots of levels and then do something about it and continuously improve the organization.
100%. And I think also like what I get from both of your answers is also like having diverse sources of feedback rather than just a suggestion box or just an anonymous poll survey. And I think Dr. Bauer and Dr. Hayes too, like if we're trying to uncover those biases, like we can only do it with one source because as an organization grow, many people have many ways to communicate, right? So you got to make sure that you're there when those people are ready to communicate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of times our knee-jerk reaction is towards surveys, which is a great system, right? Surveys work well for lots of reasons, but mixed methodology, more touch points, more motion detectors are really, really helpful because it gives you both qualitative and quantitative what's going on, but also why. And you might get people more engaged. Like the person who won't respond to a survey might be likely to show up for a focus group or be engaged in an interview where you're asking for feedback. So I love the point, Laurent. It's a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. And as like, I mean, we know it, we spoke about it a lot in previous panel. The nature of work has like dramatically changed in the last few years with the rise of hybrid work, with the pandemic, of course, but also with the Great Resignation or with the economic situation that's a bit precarious right now. So have you seen a change in how organization approach feedback with the rise of hybrid work? Sarah, do you want to take over this one?
Certainly, yes. So having been in organizations that have had working environments, either hybrid, either on site or distributed, I've seen definitely a change and also ways that they have adapted their feedback collecting style. Because as Dr. Bauer mentioned, like we've entered this phase where there's more distance than ever. People feel isolated within their working environments. So feedback agility is so important. And I think that could mean like the medium of gathering the feedback, as we've mentioned, it could look different based off of the context of the type of feedback you're gathering, the audience, the function itself, like from marketing to a technology function. You need to really tailor it to who's responding to the feedback, and also the frequency, I think. I've seen organizations do the feedback collecting once a quarter, for example, or even like once every 2 quarters. And oftentimes what happens is that by the time you get to sit down and do an analysis of what people have said, the feedback is actually not fully relevant anymore. An organization being a living, breathing organism, people have so many external, internal factors that play a part on how their week can simply shift from a customer that they speak with to a colleague that they interact with. So it's hard to, balance it. But I would say if you have the means of doing a one-on-one, or like perhaps coaching leaders on how to gather feedback throughout one-on-ones, or perhaps even weekly pulse checks. It doesn't need to be a very formal survey. Sometimes it could just take a couple of moments in someone's week. But if that information can be then not only received, but even actioned the following week, and how perhaps the leader responds back to the employee in a different approach, or perhaps asks an additional question in the one-on-one that really speaks to the feedback, it's a micro adjustment that could really make a big impact. So you don't need to wait for the quarterly survey to do a full-on analysis of the data and treat it as a project. You can also pepper it in a much more frequent approach to have agility. And the second part of my answer, I would say, is another way that organizations have had to shift is to put the accountability on leaders as well. And this was our previous webinar topic, so check out the recording if you haven't already. But essentially setting them up for success with the technology so that they can single-handedly access what people have to say and be able to build action items to commit to with their HR business partners. And that way, it's not all on HR either to action and respond to feedback. You're sharing the responsibility with the leadership, and also, bringing them as part of the solution. So I think with those two things, a lot of organizations have been able to adapt to providing not just a medium that feedback can be given on a much more agile basis, but also be able to action it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Such great
100%.
points. Yeah. I mean, I think that with hybrid work, the importance of feedback has risen. We talked a little bit about that, but also we know statistically people's expectations of organizations have risen. Like, people want to be asked for their feedback more frequently. They want to have a voice. I think one of the shifts we're seeing is in the kind of feedback that people are being asked for, and well-being is a really important piece. Like, to what extent do you have a sense of the ability to navigate work and life? To what extent does your work feel meaningful? To what extent do you have an opportunity to connect with other people, right? All those kinds of things that are not just about the performance or the overall responses to the organizational culture, but about your specific experience. So I think we're seeing shifts in the nature of the feedback that we're seeking, the kind of information we're seeking. And then I love your point, Sarah, about frequency. Like, that's something else we're seeing as well, is lots more organizations that are looking for more feedback more of the time, and doing that kind of in pulse surveys. So not necessarily like asking every single person, but asking subsets or representative sets. That seems really important. I think the other thing we're seeing is that organizations are needing to be really checked in about feedback fatigue, because we want more information, we want employee voice, and we know they want to provide it. We're asking more questions more of the time in more ways. And then, oh my gosh, people are like, oh, you're asking me again, and I just need to get my work done. So I think that's the other thing we're seeing, is organizations that are trying to be really sensitive to how do we find that Goldilocks just right amount of looking for feedback and staying in touch with it, and then really being able to make sure it's not too much or so much. So those are some of the challenges that I think we're seeing, and some of the changes we're seeing in terms of how employers are thinking about gathering feedback.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen, Dr. Brower, like organization who are able to find that right balance? Like, what would you say is that right balance for like asking for feedback to employees with and preventing feedback fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, one
Is
of
there
the
like a
things that
frequency or like a recipe or like
yeah, totally. I mean, what we're seeing is lots of organizations that are looking for feedback from a broad set of employees, maybe yearly. And then maybe on a quarterly basis, we're seeing these pulse surveys. And in a pulse survey, maybe you're getting feedback from 20% of the people, and that's a different set each quarter. So nobody is overburdened. I think the other thing that's really interesting is, you mentioned this, Sarah, organizations that are really skilling up leaders to be able to ask more meaningful questions and more intentional questions of employees in meetings, like, how's it going? Or, what are your 5 things you're challenged with and 5 things you're excited about, right? You do that in every one-on-one, for example. So that leader and individual contributor, or that leader team member feedback is happening more often, and it's another kind of methodology that seems to work really well. So I think that mix of frequency, so that no one person is kind of overburdened. The last thing I would say there, we're seeing some really great things in terms of like point of work feedback. So organizations that have like a conference room or a work setting, or, a neighborhood that people sit in, and there's a QR code, and you click on the QR code and you can, fill out 5 questions about how well the space worked for you, or how well your team is doing, or whatever, which are more pull based, right? So I can pull for the survey if I'm interested in participating, versus push based, where everybody got the request for input, whether they were looking for it or not. So I think that's another really great sort of agile methodology for obtaining feedback that's kind of newer in terms of our experience.
Yeah, I'd also like to offer in there that we don't only have to use a method in order to be able to gather the feedback, is that we should be looking for informal ideas about how to get that feedback as well. If we go out and have coffee with somebody and they start complaining about something, that's feedback that we should be taking in. If, basically you have, something where you're probably not going out, to, into a larger gathering with the people who report to you, but somebody is. And, if they could, not violate any trust, but say something about what's going on. I think say, okay, like, what are people complaining about? That's something that gives you feedback as well. Or you're just sitting there, and if you are in person and having that water cooler chat, saying, what, the company is really worried about X. What do you think about it? And it's not something that has to be in a meeting. It's not something that needs a QR code. It's not something where we need to gather it formally and have all the data in this one pile that needs to be analyzed and constructed and reported on. That we can have conversations as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. But I also want to echo one of the points that was made in the chat. We also get feedback fatigue, not from the question upon question upon question upon question, but on the fact that they're not being answered. So one person put it in the chat, it was also echoed. So I just wanted to amplify it even more, that basically, if we're not doing a good job of addressing the feedback, people aren't going to answer the question. If they do, they're going to like select the same number, like it's, so that they can get out of there as fast as possible, which makes our feedback that we are gathering more formally not interpretable, because they're not answering honestly. So we have to think about the culture around it and doing a good part of like thinking about. I personally really love that a multi-pronged approach, and it doesn't necessarily have to have something that involves numbers and crunching.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think what you're getting at that's so critical is it's really about culture. We want a culture of like lots of information flow and information sharing, where we can have a dialogue about how's it going, even if it's informal. We have a culture of action where we're taking action and improving all of the time. And we have that sort of culture of trust, where people feel like they can actually answer the question, whether it's formal or informal, if we're checking in and asking how it's going and asking for ideas about how to improve. So it's kind of that culture of information and openness, culture of trust, culture of action that go together, which is like, we can do the most brilliant methodologies around feedback, but those cultural elements are what actually will make the biggest difference.
I totally agree.
And
And
that's
I
a great
think,
seg. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
sorry, I just wanted to add one point, because I think this is a very key point, that culture is a culmination of every conversation you have. It doesn't live as the sentence or phrase in the company portal. It's really, like I was saying, an organization being a living, breathing organism is this accumulation of every single micro interaction that takes place. So as much as we can say like leaders are accountable, employees are also part of it too, like how they decide to bring things play such a big role. Like we will need to, as HR leaders, enable that to exist so that people feel safe and able to bring those points. But it's truly thanks to the feedback that we're able to define a culture in the first place. So I think there's a big uh, life cycle that we've identified here.
Yeah, it's great. And it's actually a great segue to our third question of the panel. We mentioned culture. So how can organization or HR professional create a culture where employees feel safe and empowered to provide that feedback?
Mm-hmm. I think when it comes down to, what we just talked about, people today like don't work for businesses, they work with companies, right? Like they're in it for the success of the business as much as, it's a collective effort. And so that it's ever more so important to really feel that when you're submitting feedback, someone is listening to it on the other end, but that beyond that, like you can be involved in how to action it. So I see feedback as two different categories. You have like feedback when it comes down to satisfaction, like how do you feel working in the business? And then there's also like context specific feedback. Let's say post an initiative, we talked about a QR code being scanned after, for example, like an event or having used a conference room, as simple as that. Like you can also, as a follow-up to that, like ask them like, okay, so this is the feedback. What what would you do? Like what was the idea you had or the ideal state of how we could together collectively work towards a resolution, and making them or inviting them to be part of the solution beyond just a rating scale, having it perhaps embed in the qualitative text based questions, I think is a way to incite them to feel like they're part of the solution. And it's not just giving, constructive feedback, but it's a step beyond it. And it takes a lot of, I think, just leading by example, meaning that leaders or perhaps even peer colleagues doing that in everyday conversation. So for instance, if I'm in a meeting room with a couple of peers and I notice that there's an elephant in the room, no one is calling it, I will ask that question that no one else is asking, or try to listen when no one else is listening to that perhaps area of interest or problem to solve. And by seeing people do that, I think the collective business will feel more and more safe, and feel that space is given as soon as a leader or mentor that you look up to has done it, and you see how it's been done in a very constructive, productive way with a really key intention of ultimately solving the problem. I think that entices people to be able to follow suit and do it as well. And that's a ripple effect. So I think you need to start somewhere, like, and it's daunting. You need to take the leap. But once you do, there's so much of a cause and effect of other people who will hop on the bandwagon as well. And so I think it's a really key way to create and foster that safe space for people to feel comfortable, is by seeing others do so as well.
And I definitely co-sign everything that you're saying, Sarah. Just to add that creating a culture of feedback doesn't actually start with feedback. It starts with our everyday interactions. It starts with the way that we treat each other. It starts with really seeing each other as humans first. That's what I always do. And in my approaches and within my consulting is helping everybody to see each other as humans first, because we need to know that our voices are valued, or we end up trying to look for a different place where we hope our voice will be valued. And we probably hired people because they had talents and we wanted them to stay. So what can we do around that? So I like a culture where the manager speaks last in a meeting, so that then everybody really expresses what they're thinking instead of like basically echoing things they've already heard someone in leadership say. Someone else in the chat used the term stay chat. I prefer the term stay interviews. I don't think it really matters which term you use, but basically it's sitting people down and saying, we really love the work that you're doing. It's not that there isn't anything that can't be improved. There's always room for improvement, but we love that you're working here. Why do you want to stay? We like let's dive deeper into that. When I do stay interviews with my staff, I ask very explicitly, what do I do that annoys the crap out of you? So that way they have an opportunity to know that I mean the questions. I am listening, and I am trying to put things into perspective and trying to make action items around them. There's a really good question in the Q&A about like what if a company has been through so many different changes that as in like layoffs that people really don't want to like participate in the engagement surveys and you have a low participation rate. When that happens, a low participation rate is also data. It means there's something going on in the culture. When that's going on, I encourage a company to call a spade a spade. We know that it has been rough with this turnover. We know that's impacting you, and we really want to hear how it is and want to know how we can keep you. So one way to do that is, of course, with those stay interviews, one-on-one with like the staff and the direct report, and trying to parse out like, well, what makes you love working here so that we can enhance those things. And another way is, of course, to have like those more larger surveys and try to figure out what is the climate here, what can we improve. But another way that people are liking in the chat is those coffee chats. That's something that I also did within my company, and just it gives an opportunity to people to just say, "Hey, what's happening here?" And to we can focus the chat around current issues and current events. We can focus it around, "Hey, we're faced with this and we're stuck with trying to figure out how to get through it. What are what are your thoughts?" Or focus it in a different way, and let people like make suggestions about like what the chat should be on, or if there should be absolutely no topic for that day. But when we're doing this, we should always remember that the workplace, and this is what is supported by DEI as well, is it's about respect and fairness, and we want to encourage that and foster it and make it so that it continues, and that it's well supported.
100%. I agree with everything you said, Dr. Hayes. I saw someone in the chat, Nabila, who said sometimes no feedback is also feedback. It's like it reflects what you said about like a low participation rate is data. I can speak for like WorkLeap as an organization. Sarah, you've been part of it. Also, we started doing those coffee chats. I think it was around April this year. I know I had one with my HRBP, and it was a great initiative. Like as an employee or an individual contributor, it really feels good to know that your CEO or HR team is listening to you and try to gather some feedback to maintain continuous improvement. So kudos for that, and all the organization who are also doing a similar initiative, similar to a stay interview. So Sarah, if you have anything to add on that, go ahead. If not, we can go to the,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can add one point about coffee chats. It's given us such a more like human approach, because you could go into like, of course, Slack or team. Like we talked about being remote, but it was still virtual for the most part. We've done those coffee chats virtually, but just the interaction, taking 30 minutes also shows intentionality behind like no, we have over 400 employees, so definitely will take a while until we meet with every single person, but it definitely shows as well like that authenticity of care, and gave us the same result, I would say even better data points than sometimes like having a response with no, you could follow up on it, of course, but it's not that interaction back and forth conversation. So I highly recommend it from like an HR experience point of view as well. Like it just connects you as well to the organization so that you have an insight as to what's going on, what's the culture really like. So highly recommended.
Yeah, connection is the key there, I feel too. Like I didn't know my HRBP before those coffee chats. So like it's a great way also to build connection within an organization that's a hybrid. So kudos for that. Let's get into the actionable. part of the webinar. I know, like I see everyone in the chat that's already sharing a lot of very actionable strategies, but I'd like to hear from you, experts. So what are some best practices that you've seen to translate the feedback that you get, whether it is from poll survey, from coffee chats, or from any feedback source, and translate that into actionable engagement strategies?
I can go with my points. I think when it comes down to best practices, just by experience, uh, reading feedback, especially when it's qualitative and someone has taken the time to write down what they feel, how they're perceiving the organizational period, it's very tempting to go straight into solution mode and have that mindset of, okay, like what can we do to solve this? Because I think as HR professionals, leaders, we all really care. Like this is one of the main reasons why we're here today. So you do need to resist that urge because well defining the problem first is so pillar before you get hands-on into the action item of finding a solution. I think from my own lessons learned, sometimes I've been too quick on just getting to that final stage of, okay, what should we propose with leadership on how to enhance these elements, which seems to be like what matters most for people, that we were solving for the wrong problem. So having a not spending too much time either with a very thorough analysis. We talked about like perhaps investing in tech that could help you do that and give access to leadership so that you're not sitting, building a PowerPoint slide of the heat map for a leader's team so that they can have the information easily reachable, do their thinking, do their analysis of what it means for them and add the context and work together to, once you have really a solid problem to solve and you've defined that, then engage the right stakeholders. Because the risk is that if you don't do that preliminary step, you might be, engaging someone who's not perhaps the best person to work with you on perhaps an HR program or initiative that could be even more time consuming. And time is of essence. We mentioned this, like the agility is so key. So that period that you have once the feedback has been sent, it's limited because if it takes too long, the person having submitted the feedback doesn't see that it's been received or, doesn't mean that it will be actioned right away either. But it's really important that that window of time doesn't go too far. So I would say use tech, invest in the leadership as well, like giving them access to set them up for success. And last but not least, define the problem. And once you have all those things, you're going to be set for success to action a solution. So that's what I would say are best practices.
Yeah, I would echo that by just saying that when we are going towards, okay, here's a solution after we've done all the listening, it's like, it's saying, okay, this is what I heard. So that when we define that problem, we know that we defined it well. And then as we say, okay, this is what we're thinking of in terms of addressing the solution and getting feedback on that too, because they may be thinking something totally different about how to best address the problem. And by those conversations that, that continue in our ongoing, including those coffee chat like conversations that are more informal, we have a chance to really see, okay, does this solution work, for the way that they're thinking about the problem, and is it meaningful and to them? I would also add in there to lean on your employee resource groups, your ERGs. And when they bring something, especially if the ERG is from a marginalized group, like the all women ERG or the Black ERG, or maybe it's an LGBTQ plus ERG, don't also say, okay, will you solve the problem? Because it's I don't know, sorry, I have a really horrible story of a woman where someone drew a Nazi symbol on her desk and they told her to clean it up. Yes, it's just like that, things like that infuriate me, of course. I'm sure it makes your blood boil. But we can do that same thing in other ways by basically saying, oh, you have a problem. Okay, well, you go ahead and solve it. It's, of course, it's not apples to apples. It's not the same thing, but we should be really thinking about, okay, how are we addressing these issues whenever they're brought, by a marginalized group because of bias that they're perceiving against their group. And of course, we should consult with and say, okay, this is what we heard, this is what we're thinking. But whatever the action steps are for carrying it out, we want to make sure that they're involved in the thinking about it, but not the ones that are literally solving the problem, because it really just adds more burden, and that's just not what we should be looking for as a company. We should be listening. But what I also think about is really just that, is focusing on transparency, because and with as many steps of the process as you can be transparent with, that's also really helpful when you get feedback and it's taking too long in order to be able to like address that feedback, and then that feedback gets kind of stale and people think, oh, you don't really care about what we're saying, and that becomes part of the culture that, oh, okay, well, they don't listen, we're not heard. So if you can just involve that transparency in, okay, this is where we are in terms of addressing it, and this is where we're going next, and so that people know that we need another resource if you can't address it yet, or we did, and this is what we did, and continually, just report on and get those thoughts out there, so that you're not just operating in a silo and making assumptions about what people do and don't know and what they're thinking about how you're addressing it or not.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of the best practices, right? Make sure it's both formal and informal. Make sure it's both quantitative and qualitative, telling you both what is going on and why that's going on. Make sure that it's really kind of regular, that we're looking for feedback and there's a cadence to the feedback. I think another thing we haven't talked as much about is the importance of people hearing each other's feedback. Like that's one of the things I think that's really useful about like using an ERG, to your point, Dr. Hayes, or, doing like group sessions, right? Because I think a lot of times when we ask for feedback, people are very much in an I mode. This is what I want. This is what I think. This is my experience individually. And it's really helpful to hear a broader perspective, because I always love to say, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Because just by asking the question, you're setting an expectation that you're going to listen, that you're going to continuously improve, that you're going to find the patterns and the outliers and be able to really respond. And so when I think being in a feedback session together gives us empathy for the organization or the HR department or the leader who's got to make changes. Because I might say, gosh, I want a blue sky. And you say, no, 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 I want a green sky. And somehow we have to find a place together to create a great work experience. So I think that's a really important part of our development of empathy toward each other. The last thing I would say is I think it's brilliant when we set up pilots and prototypes and tests and trials. So, try something small with your new benefits, or try something small with the new affinity group or whatever, and then get feedback on it. And then last, we talked about, taking action on the feedback we receive, but I think we've got to make sure it's a two-way communication street. Like, we heard you say this, therefore we're taking this action. We know this is a priority, therefore we're moving in this direction. We know this is critical. Oh, we have a lot on the plate. We know that we're going to get to that as soon as we can. We've got to be able to give people feedback about the feedback and let them know we're listening, and do that in a really intentional and way that gives us high awareness. We had a wonderful example. We were working with a company, and there was a lot of feedback on how leaders weren't making fast enough decisions. The organization was kind of mired in unclear lines of responsibility and unclear areas of accountability. And so there was a lot of feedback gathered with mixed methodologies. And then the organization got back and said, here's what we're going to do about it. And the primary thing they did was they made shifts to the performance management system, and they did a ton in terms of leadership development. there was more they needed to do, but they bit off what they could and they were really clear with employees. And then they checked in again to make sure that there was improvement and that they were making progress toward the goal. So there's so many ways for us to do it right. And part of it is just taking the right action, right?
Yeah, I can see why you would say don't ask questions you don't want the answer to, but I do want to offer that you should ask questions that get you out of your comfort zone.
Totally. Yes. Yes. But don't ask a question if you're just asking it for the sake of asking it
No,
and
then you're
you're
wasting
not going
people's
to do
time.
anything about it. Yeah, I love your point. That's great.
I think it's tailoring the questions to the audience, right? Like making sure that you're not just working off of a template, a generic template. You're truly intentional about every word, because even the formulation of the question matters.
It does.
People the interpretation I have might be different than what someone else might have of the same question, and then you need to at one point have a streamlined set of responses to be able to like do a summary assessment. So
Yeah, we had years of graduate
really
training
important.
within my PhD to be able to construct those surveys well. So that's one of the things that I always like to offer is that type of survey construction to make sure that the questions themselves are constructed in a way that makes a lot of sense and are catered to that company and its culture and improving that culture.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question before we go into the audience Q&A, if that's okay with you. I think all of you like got into it a little bit during the last question, but what are some real life stories about effective HR programs that came from employee feedback you saw?
I can go first with a few examples. So we this past fiscal year have launched a completely new performance management cycle, a new approach where we're going with quarterly feedback. And to go back on the point of piloting, we did that very thoroughly before we launched it to the entire organization. And that gave us such key feedback to be able to adjust for the real launch. So it was really I think equivalent to like how a product team would go about doing some user testing interview to understand like, okay, what does this what do the audience actually need and crave, and what works because it adds context to like your concept that you might have designed. So that feedback came in super handy to know like how are people actually going to use it. It was a small group, but definitely very, very insightful research came out of that. Another example would be as as you know, we're a distributed company, so we don't see each other every single day, but we do have gatherings twice a year where we all come together to build on social connection, have strategic conferences. And days before we had our last gathering, we deployed an org-wide survey. I would say actually weeks before, and we did the analysis the week prior, came up with some really important elements that matter to people. We discovered that, you know, in communications, the why is so important, and the cascade of communications is also very, very important. People crave to know the context and the why something is being communicated to them. And that was key information for us to then integrate into the gathering itself, and how we were presenting all these strategic conferences and presentations where everyone was present. So it was a very quick win, I would say. Like we were able to adopt and tweak things the week after. And the last example I'll leave you with is when it comes down to defining our perks, our benefits, and how we've arranged for renewing everything. It all started with a survey. It all started with a very context-specific survey, of course, of what matters to people and trying to understand the audience. And that was, you know, preliminary user research that we used as well, very similarly, again, to what a product team would do. So I would say it's now like really part of the key start of a project. Like the internal understanding is very, very key, as much as the external understanding and benchmarking. Like it might work, but you won't know unless you ask your people whether that textbook data is appropriate for the context of your business. So that's what I would say.
And so for me, I did conduct one of those surveys for an organization that I used to work for, and we focused on, of course, like how does it feel to work here, but also the, are you perceiving bias? What do you feel about like cultural competency, and what are your thoughts around it? We found out they felt that they didn't know enough and were worried about having those conversations. So that led to having those informal lunch chats where we could focus a topic on, whatever was happening within the media, but also different questions that we were receiving. Sometimes they were just wondering, okay, so we're hearing people talk a lot about cultural appropriation. What is it? So we could have a lunch chat just on cultural appropriation so that everyone knew more about what it was and what to do. But that climate survey also told us that people were wary about the onboarding process. So we listened further and was just like, okay, what's going on? What are you thinking? And it led to a more streamlined approach where everyone was basically in hiring cohorts where like once a week they would have like a different meeting focused on all the different things you're supposed to learn. And that went on for a little over a month, but it helped everybody to know someone who was outside of their department because obviously weren't hiring a whole bunch in the department at once and keeping them all in one department. But when you're hired, you are hired into a department where everybody knows each other and you don't. So it helped with not having as many silos across the organization because you knew someone in a different department. You knew a few people, whoever you were hired with. It also helped with, oh, shoot, I can't actually make this one because it was ongoing. They could make it to the next one and meet other people who are also recent hires within the last like 2-ish months. And so it just helped out a lot to have that. And we added in an unconscious bias workshop for the new hires. So then they're starting out knowing this is the culture of the organization. We're expecting everybody to make mistakes and we're expecting everybody to learn from and grow. And that was just part of the workshop. It helped out a lot. And people were also wary about like, what if there's a microaggression? So those are those slights that can happen that are against someone's demographic group, and everyone can both commit, be a part of the microaggression, be the target, or just overhear it. So they wanted to know more about what to do, in those cases, but also know like, do I really have to take out all this like straight to HR? Like, is that really going to be the only way? So basically, we said no, and it worked alongside HR to make a very parallel approach that wasn't investigatory, and instead the approach was centered on, okay, well, how can we center that we're humans who are going to make mistakes first? How can we center that person who was microaggressed against, or maybe it was something else that was offensive that just it doesn't require investigation. It doesn't require like something going on someone's permanent record. And instead, what can we do? And so we created a transparent process so people knew what was happening all along the way. That also resulted in everyone thinking about, okay, what are the ways that we can possibly address this issue? Because sometimes the way is to have something one-on-one with that person. Sometimes the way is to have greater education around the issue so that everybody knows. And sometimes people don't, and maybe perhaps even should not be in the same room with each other talking about this specific issue. So because we had different methods of addressing that issue, it helped in order to be able to have a more positive work environment. And I can go further into that if anybody wants to reach out for a one-on-one. And
Yeah,
see
I
the
can just
note,
share
I
really
am
quickly.
comfortable with email. Sorry to cut you off, Dr. Brower. Just saw very quickly. Is Dr. E comfortable with email? So can you share? I will type it into the chat.
Yeah, I can share just super, super quickly. We worked with a client and they were looking for feedback on their well-being programs, and they were going to just make some very quantitative decisions about what benefits they were offering. And one of the things they heard when they were really listening, doing their listening sessions is, oh my gosh, like I didn't need adoption assistance, but I love that we offer it for other people. Or I don't use the pet insurance, but I love that, we have it available. And so for them, they decided it was less about the numbers of people who were taking advantage of some of those well-being and benefits programs, and it was more about the message they were sending by having them. Another great example, we had an organization we were working with that had a really great mentorship program, and they were, really intentional and planful and systematic about assigning mentors and having discussion guides and having meetings and check-ins and trainings. And they learned that people wanted an ongoing nature to the program. So they added that option in, and they learned that people wanted the program to go on longer than the 6 months that they had planned. And so they were able to just make some really wonderful mid-course corrections and scale the program as well based on their early learning. So some nice examples.